Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Ashrafil Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Over the past few weeks, we have been looking at the topic of medication in Islam, and we concluded last week's lesson by looking at some adabs and some etiquettes when it comes to visiting the sick, when it comes to visiting an ill person. And I mentioned that when we visit a sick or an ill person, we should not spend too much time there, because he will be bimar, he's probably feeling some pain, some difficulty. So we shouldn't basically go there, talk to him too much, talk to him about dunya, about worldly things, but just be there for a short period of time. However, if that person, say for example, is better, or he's becoming better and he's recovering, and in particular, if that person is such that he wasn't practicing before he fell ill, then it will be a good idea to just mention a few things about Allah, about Deen, about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because remember, da'wah, or conveying the message of the oneness of Allah, the message of being good believers, being good Muslims, praying salah, is not just restricted to a masjid environment, it's not restricted to an institution environment, it's not restricted to a madrasa or a maktab environment, but it can be done wherever, whenever. Take example of Sayyiduna Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was in prison and two other people came and they saw a dream. Everybody knows the story that one of them saw that a bird was eating bread from his head, whereas another person saw that he was feeding wine to the master, to the king. So it's mentioned in the Quran that before Yusuf alayhi salam gave the interpretation of these two dreams, he explained to them firstly that you need to believe in the oneness of Allah, you can't be ascribing partners with Allah, you can't be committing shirk. So from this we can understand that da'wah can be given anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a masjid or a madrasa to encourage people, to give nasiyah to people. You can give it anywhere, everywhere, even to the extent that in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, he gave da'wah to the two people in a prison. So as I was saying, that if a person is ill or sick and is kind of recovering, he's getting better, then it will be a good opportunity at that particular time to tell him about deen, to tell him about religion. One masla which I forgot to mention in last week's lesson about visiting the sick and the ill, which one of the brothers kindly reminded me afterwards, is that is it permissible for a Muslim man to go and visit a ghair mahram woman who's ill, who's bimar? So we mentioned the virtues of visiting sick people, ill people. But is it permissible for a Muslim man to visit a ghair mahram woman? Now the answer in a nutshell is that it is not permissible because of the rules of parda, hijab, modesty. But one can still get the reward of visiting the sick and the ill. One can still get the reward of iyadatul marid if that person was to ask, say if that sister who's ill or bimar, if she has a husband, so if that person was to ask her husband that, I heard your wife's ill, is she better? And if the husband says yes, she's better, or she's not better, then by querying or asking the husband of that sick woman, or of that woman who's ill, or if she's not married, then asking her brother that, I heard your sister's ill, is she okay? Or if she doesn't have brother, then asking her father, or someone who is connected to her, related to her, someone who is her mahram, like her husband or like her father or her brother, then by asking these individuals about the well-being of that particular ill woman, you will also get the reward of iyadatul marid. So in a nutshell, it's not permissible to actually go and visit a woman who's bimar. In particular, if a woman happens to be your ghair mahram, obviously if she's your mahram, like sisters, obviously aunties and so on and so forth, you can. But if she's a ghair mahram, then you're not allowed to go and visit them, go and see them, because obviously the rules of hijab and modesty. But you could still get the reward and thawab of visiting the ill and the sick if, say, for example, you asked about her well-being from someone who is related to her, like the mahram of that particular sister, or the husband of that particular sister, or the father of that particular sister. Obviously, some may be thinking, well, there are hadiths of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam visiting women. So obviously the answer simply is that we ourselves cannot compare to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned the Quran is لِيَغْفِرَ لَكَ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِكَ وَمَا تَأَخَّرَ, which means that all of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's shortcomings before and afterwards have been totally eradicated, wiped away. In other words, trying to imply that Aap sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he can't commit a sin. It's not possible, it's not mumkin for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to even think about a sin. So when Aap sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be in front of strange women, there would be no lust, desires, temptations there. But obviously we ourselves, we can't say that for sure, that when we are with a strange woman there won't be any lust or desires. So therefore, because of modesty, hijab and parda, the rule is that we are not allowed to visit a woman who's bimar or sick, but we could still get the reward of visiting the sick or an ill person if we were to ask about her well-being from her husband, if she has one, or from other related mahrams. Now in today's lesson, because obviously this topic is about medication and about diseases and what Islam says and how Islam counteracts these diseases and these illnesses, I'm going to touch on two topics in today's lesson. And the two topics that I'm going to mention on is actually something haram. The two topics which I'm going to talk about, probably 10-15 years ago, there wouldn't have been a need for an imam or a scholar to talk about it in a masjid to a Muslim audience. You would have said, oh, this is more for non-Muslims, go outside and go on to Commentary Road or some other roads, whatever, go and speak to them there. But over the past few years, we have seen, and I'm sure there's probably one or two of you probably may know someone who are involved in these two things. And the two things which I'm going to talk about today is about adultery, and number two is about alcohol. Now I'm not going to mention or scrutinize on the impermissibility or the evidence, because everybody knows it's haram. There's so many Quranic verses and so many hadiths of these two things in being haram and unlawful. But what I'm going to mention is to just explain to you the disaster which can happen for people who are in those two paths. Now, what kind of sicknesses, what kind of diseases can spread by committing adultery, by committing fornication, and also number two, by drinking alcohol regularly. Now, we'll start off with adultery and fornication. Obviously, I'll just mention one or two verses, but in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quite clearly says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا, which means that do not go near adultery at all. So what does that mean? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that don't commit adultery. When we say don't go near adultery, it means that don't obviously commit it, but also any things which may lead to adultery, which may lead to a person's lust or desires going up. These things, anything which is adultery related, don't even go near them. Don't even go onto that path. Don't even think about it. Because when you fall in that path, then it's very difficult to get out. Even something which is linked with adultery, say boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, From this ayat, we can also derive that that is also haram as well. Now, even there are some youngsters who say, well, we're not doing anything. I just know her. We just text. We just like interact via email. Even then, that is haram, because what happens is that that kind of relationship eventually will lead to adultery and fornication. It may not lead to fornication in 6 months' time, but it may lead to in 18 months' time. There's no guarantee, but it will lead to fornication. It will lead to adultery. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that don't obviously commit zina, but anything which goes towards zina is unlawful and is haram. And that's why when we look at the Holy Quran, we find many examples of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Sharia, placing guidelines to stop people from falling into zina, to stop people from falling into adultery. Many places in the Holy Quran, Allah talks about marriage and nikah, the virtues of nikah. So many hadiths about the virtues of nikah. So marriage, nikah is a way to stop a person from falling into adultery. Also, number 2, on top of that, there are also many ayats, many hadiths which talks about hijab, modesty, parda, about the importance of women covering up. There's also in the Holy Quran ayats about men lowering their gazes. In Surah Nur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Kullil mu'mineen, say to the believing men, yaghuddu min absarihim wa yahfadhu furujahum. That men should lower their gazes and wa yahfadhu furujahum, and they should protect their private parts. Now some may be thinking, shouldn't it have been the other way around? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should have firstly given the order and commands of protecting your private parts and then lowering the gazes. The reason why Allah said it firstly, no, lower your gazes first, then your private parts, is because zina and adultery, most of the time, it starts from the gaze. It starts when a man looks at a woman, because when he looks at a woman, he kind of sends signals to his brain that, okay, she's beautiful, she's pretty. And then it's the heart which then verifies it that, you know what, she's good looking, she's beautiful, let me go and speak to her. Let me go and talk to her. And if she's not that pretty, if she's not that good looking, then obviously there'll be no signals being sent to the heart. But it starts from the eyesight. So if you're lowering your gazes, then inshallah it won't be a problem. Or as mentioned in the hadith, that if you accidentally glanced at a woman and then you took your glance away, that's okay. But what is not allowed is a continuous kind of gaze or glance at a woman. That is unlawful, that is haram. Why? Because it will lead to temptation, lust, it will lead towards adultery and fornication. Not only that, as I was just mentioning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also commanded women to cover themselves so that they don't fall into adultery, and also men don't fall into adultery and fornication as well. Allah says, وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ, that women should not expose their zina and their beauty, their adornment. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made women such that every single part of a woman, every single juz of a woman is beautiful. Every single part of a woman is beautiful. Take an example of a hair and compare that with a man's hair. So man's hair is all like scruffy and all over the place and so on, whereas a woman's hair is nice, flowing, locks, beautiful and so on. You take her arms and you look at your own arm, you'll see a difference. So was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's made women such that every single part of them is beautiful. So now to stop men from falling into that gaze and obviously interaction and temptation and lust, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered women to obviously cover themselves. Not only that, the verse thereafterwards then continues where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَضْرِبْنَ بِأَرْجُلِهِنَّ, which means that women, when they are walking, they should not walk by tapping their feet on the ground. Now during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, women, they would wear anklets around their ankles. So what would happen is that when they would walk, it would make a kind of, the bells around would make a chiming sound. So what would happen? It would attract men's attention. Now obviously modern day example, women are not wearing anklets, but they're wearing high heels, or they're wearing other kind of sandals. So again, as Allah says, when they walk with high heels, it makes a tapping sound. لِيُعْلَمَ مَا يُخْفِينَ مِنْ زِينَتِهِنْ. So Allah says that when they walk like that with a tapping sound, it draws everyone's attention to that particular sound. Naturally, if you like reading here, or if I'm talking and there's a tapping sound outside, you naturally stop and ask yourself, what's happening outside? What's that tapping sound? So exactly the same with high heels of women, that when it's a tapping sound, naturally there's a signal being sent to your brain that, okay, where is this sound coming from? You're curious, you want to see where this awaz is coming from. It's from that side. So when you then locate, okay, the sound's coming from that side, that man would then look at that particular woman. Now, even though that woman may be in hijab and parda, she may be proper full niqab, but even then, the man will still want to look at that woman. Because unfortunately, what happens is that they've made the high heels such that when they walk, their body sways. So they're kind of like swaying out like this. So their body is kind of sticking out, their upper part is sticking out, their back is kind of sticking out. Even though they're wearing hijab and parda niqab, is kind of, they're swaying, there's this kind of sway in the way they walk. So even though that woman is fully covered, it's still sending signals to that particular person that, the way she's walking, she must be really beautiful inside. Even though he can't see her. So these are all rules from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to stop adultery and fornication from happening. Lowering the gazes, women covering themselves, women, not walking with high heels, these kind of things. Because unfortunately the high heels have been made that it just makes a sound. We wear shoes, our shoes don't make no sound at all. But the high heels, it's just been made in such a way that it just creates sound. I'm sure, looking at it the sophisticated way the dunya is nowadays, I'm sure they probably could make some heels, high heels, where it's not making sound. They could do that with men's shoes, that it doesn't make a sound at all. You can't even hear a man's shoe. But when it comes to women's shoes, it just makes a sound. So this is all obviously ways of, trying to entice people to immorality, behayai, and these kind of things. And the Sharia, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that, has put all these guidelines down so that people don't fall into that particular path. Now going back to obviously the theme of today's talk about the diseases or the illnesses which spread. There's a very beautiful hadith. Beautiful in terms of this hadith shows how true Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. Shows the truthfulness, the haqqaniyat of Islam. This hadith which can be found in Sunan Ibn Majah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prophesied that when immorality or behayai spreads in a community or in the world, diseases will also spread as well. Diseases, plagues will also spread as well. Now you tell me 50, 60 years ago, nowadays these diseases we hear, gonorrhea or AIDS, HIV, all these kind of like sexual transmitted diseases, we never ever heard of them 50, 60 years ago. Obviously most of them went to life 50 years, but I want to say generally speaking that we didn't even hear of these diseases. It's just like recently, past few years, we hear these diseases that, if a man, commits zina or is a habitual fornicator, then he carries these kind of illnesses, or a woman, she carries these kind of illnesses. These kind of words or terms, we didn't hear it 50, 60 years ago, 100 years ago. Why? Because 50, 60, 100 years ago, zina wasn't common. Even in non-Muslims, they were, when they got married, as they say, like, till death do us apart, whatever, they only had one partner. They remained, husband and wife. But now, because of zina becoming so so common, adultery becoming so common, that as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has predicted, sexually transmitted diseases will also spread as well. And we see that nowadays. And as I was saying, that even history will tell you this as well, that before, hardly anything, but just recently all these things have started. Now it's also mentioned that where does these diseases, how does it start? Who are the most likely to carry, who are the most, you could say, the culprits in carrying these kind of diseases? Now it's mentioned that women in particular who have many men, they are more likely to carry these kind of diseases. And also those, na'uzubillah, men who do homosexuality, they are also likely to carry these kind of diseases as well. Because in Islam says that a woman can or should only have one partner. That's why, as you know, in Islam, one woman, a wife, is not allowed to have 4 husbands. And this is the main reason why, because when a woman, if she's like sleeping around with many men, every few days she's committing zina with another man, then what happens is that because all the semen and everything, it goes into one area of different men, different bacteria, different kind of germs, that particular woman is more likely to suffer, is more likely to catch diseases. And then obviously when another man then has zina with her, has intercourse with her, then he then obviously will carry that disease. And then obviously if that man happens to be married, he then may infect his wife, and in this particular way the disease will spread. Now there is a hadith which can be found in Kanzul Ummal, and again this also shows the truthfulness of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that when men, or when zina, or when somebody commits zina or adultery, there will be punishment definitely in the hereafter. So you'll get punished for it in the hereafter. But in this hadith of Kanzul Ummal, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that you will get punished for it in this world as well. You will get punished for it in this world. Now there are some men, Muslims even, they commit zina and they say, well, nothing's happened to me. Look at me, now I'm committing zina every night. Nothing's happened. There's no punishment. They do that kind of like jur'a, we say in Urdu, like, they think nothing's going to happen to me. Look, I'm committing zina, nothing's happening. But one day what could happen is that when that man is committing zina and the woman he's committed zina with, if she happens to have AIDS, if she happens to have HIV, and then that man is affected with it, that is the punishment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised that man in this world. So what I mean by punishment hereafter, obviously as mentioned, the hadith will be hellfire for adulterers, for fornicators. But punishment in this world could be in the means of these diseases which they carry. These diseases, if they get infected with, because obviously something like AIDS, there's no cure for them. HIV, there's no cure for them. So that is the azab or the khizyun, the humiliation Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put to that person in this world. Because when you look at it, those who have AIDS or HIV, we see them, no one likes to mix with them. No one wants to know them. They're just like left totally, say for example, isolated. Even to the extent that if they were to walk into a busy restaurant or a takeaway, you'll see naturally people, if they know he's HIV or AIDS, they'll want to like stay away from him. To the extent that if the seat where he was sitting on, they don't want to sit on that exact same seat. Now you tell me, how humiliating is that? Just an example, like I'm sitting here. Now if somebody, for example, if I was carrying a particular disease or something and then no one comes and sits here, you get like obviously a bit humiliated that, look, this guy doesn't want to sit next to me, he doesn't want to sit on the same place I sat on. You get humiliated. So this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised for those who commit zina, that in the hereafter they will get punished, but in this world they will get azab in terms of carrying these kind of sexually transmitted diseases. And also number 2, they will also get humiliated. Ruswayi khizyun fi dunya, they will get humiliated, they will get ruswa, they will get totally degraded by having these kind of diseases where people will not want to mix with them, people will not want to sit next to them, people will not want to like join with them, talk to them. So that in a way is a form of humiliation which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised for those who do fornication, those who commit adultery. So in a nutshell, I was saying that the point of talking about this topic here is You know, I'm sure many of us probably know one or two Muslims, or even more for some, who are involved in this kind of things. So we should obviously advise them, tell them not to, and also warn them of the consequences of getting involved in this particular sin and this particular guna. Very quickly, the second topic which I want to mention is about alcohol. Now again, as I was saying that 10-15 years ago, you know, you would hardly hear of a Muslim drinking alcohol. It was so ba'id, so ajib of a Muslim drinking alcohol. It never ever, it's like they don't mix. Muslim drinking alcohol 10-15 years ago, 20 years ago, you would never ever hear a Muslim drinking alcohol. But now unfortunately, we live in such a time where, because of cheap beer as well, and because of other reasons and other kind of factors, many Muslims are involved in drinking alcohol. Some are actually proud. They actually say that, yeah, I drink alcohol. So alcohol, now obviously I think I may have touched on it before, the severity of this mentioned in many hadiths, kullu muskirin khamrun, that every intoxicant is a khamar, and wa kullu khamrin haramun, and every khamar or every alcohol is haram, is unlawful. So there's many hadiths like that. Similarly, in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that alcohol, gambling, these kind of things, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, that you need to stay away from it if you want success. If you want to achieve success, which is, you know, following the Quran, following the Sunnah, if you want to achieve success in terms of being a good Muslim and entry into Jannah and paradise, then you need to stay away from alcohol, you need to stay away from gambling and these kind of things. So alcohol, these kind of things are totally haram, totally unlawful. Many Quranic verses, many hadiths which indicate towards that. Even to the extent that in an Islamic state, anyone who is caught or convicted of drinking alcohol, he gets lashed 80 times. Initially, at the very beginning of Islam, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't that strict. If a person was caught or was convicted of drinking alcohol, in terms of would lash him a few times and would then let him off. But then later on, during Hazrat Umar anhu's Khilafat, he became strict with this issue, and anyone who was caught drinking alcohol, he would lash them 80 times. So looking at it from the legal side, it is obviously totally something haram. If anybody is caught, then he should be dealt severely and harshly. Now, in terms of the diseases, or in terms of what alcohol does to a person, when he drinks alcohol, it's mentioned that firstly he loses all sense of taste. What does that mean? It means that on our tongue we have taste buds, but when somebody drinks alcohol and is a habitual drinker, the taste buds on his tongue starts shrinking. And he starts shrinking in terms of what happens is that he doesn't want to eat anything else. So even if there's something like nice food on the side and there's alcohol, he'll go for alcohol and he won't go for the nice food. Why? Because everything, all the taste buds, all the nice things which any person would desire for, would totally go away, and he'll be more craving for alcohol. Then what happens is slowly on his tongue, a white layer, a white sticky layer, or a white kind of substance is formed on his tongue. Anybody who's seen anyone who drinks alcohol and who's a habitual alcoholic, you'll see that it's kind of like a white kind of substance on his tongue. And doctors have mentioned that that white kind of substance or saliva, whatever you want to call it, is the initial stages of cancer. So that leads to cancer. And not only that, it's also mentioned that those who suffer from, or those who have throat cancer, 80% of those who have throat cancer are alcoholics. Because obviously when something toxic like alcoholic is going down your mouth and then down your throat, over time, you know, the constant battering of the throat of alcohol, toxic alcohol, vodka, vodka in particular is something which is very, very dangerous. A lot of toxics from there. So something which goes down the throat eventually will lead to cancer. Not only that, alcohol messes up your liver, your kidneys, your lungs, whatever's inside your intestines, it messes that up. And also something more serious is that it makes men and women such that they are unable to have children. In other words, men, if they are habitual alcoholics, then their semen, it becomes defective. Now what could happen is that by the will of Allah, if they have intercourse, their wives or whoever, their partner could fall pregnant, but because of the defective sperm and semen, the fetus, i.e. that child who is born, will then suffer from defects as well. So that's why we see cases of and in particular it happens a lot in non-Muslim families, and in particular parents who are alcoholics, that the child who is born, he always got some kind of impairment, whether speech impairment, whether something wrong with his brain, or something wrong here, something wrong there. It happens because of the alcohol level of the partner, of the father and the mother. So these are just a few things with regards to alcohol. Something more dangerous about alcohol, and this is obviously quite clearly mentioned in a hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Al-khamru jumma'ul ithm," which means that alcohol is the root of all evil. Meaning that in our brains we have what we call sensitive cells, which in other words means that when the sensitive cells are intact, they are in order, we are bashful, we show some modesty. We know that, look, it's against morality. Even if someone's not a Muslim, even a non-Muslim person will think that, when the cells are there, that I can't just open my top, I can't open my clothes, I can't do this, I can't do, these are embarrassing things. It's against haya, it's against modesty. Even non-Muslims will think that. But when somebody drinks alcohol and he drinks too much alcohol, do you know the sensitive cells which are in the brain, which kind of tells you this is right and this is wrong, this is haya and this is ghair haya, you lose those sensitive cells. They slowly die away. And that's why we see that those men who commit adultery and fornication, and those women who have a one-night stand and they commit zina and adultery, it happens when they drank alcohol. When they've had too much alcohol, women, men, they will commit zina. Why? Because they lose that kind of modesty, that kind of haya. Not only that, sometimes when you go to town, on a Friday night, Saturday, you'll see that, or you'll hear some cases of, men who are drunk, they will just, on the main road, they will take off their trousers and just urinate there, in front of everyone. Why would they do that? Because they've lost that haya in them. So what I'm trying to say is that when you drink alcohol, when they drink alcohol, because obviously as the hadith says, al-khamru jumma'ul ithm, because alcohol leads towards evil. So when somebody drinks alcohol, it leads to zina, it leads to a person urinating in public places, it leads to a person or a woman even to take off a top or to take off her clothes, or men to walk around stark naked. Why? Because they've lost that kind of haya and modesty. Why? Because they've drank too much alcohol. So this is what alcohol does. And unfortunately, and like with zina as well, because of the diseases which are created, many Muslim men are involved in that. Even many Muslim women are also involved in that as well. So it is our duty, because this is what is Amr bil Ma'ruf, Nahy anil Munkar, bidding the fair, forbidding the unfair, that when we see our Muslim brothers involved in these kind of things, when we see our Muslim sisters involved in haram, we should also try to help them out as well. We shouldn't just think about ourselves, but we should also try to think about them as well. I'll just mention a hadith. This hadith is also in Fazail Amal as well. It's from Sahih al-Bukhari. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave us a beautiful example of the importance of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. And the example Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave was that think that there's a boat or a ship, and there's an upper level and there's a lower level. So there are some people on the upper level, some people are in the lower level. Now those who are on the lower deck, they want to get some water. So what they do, they go upstairs to the upper deck, they get the water, and the hadith goes on to explain that when they are now going down to the lower deck, they spill some water on the people on the upper deck. So the people on the upper deck say to them that, okay, you know, from now you can't get any water now. You have to stay down and we're not going to give you any water. So now the people in the lower deck, they then say to themselves that, okay, because the people on the upper deck are not giving us any water, we'll just make a hole in the lower deck and we'll get plenty of water. There'll be plenty of water coming now. So now the hadith goes on to say that if the people of the upper deck grips their hands, you know, says, no, don't do that, don't be silly, we'll give you water, najah, everybody will be saved. However, if the people of the upper deck say, no, it doesn't matter, let them, if they want to make a hole in the bottom of the boat, it doesn't matter, let them do it, then halaku jami'an, all of them will be destroyed. And that's exactly the same example when it comes to when we see our Muslim brothers and sisters doing sins or gunas outside, we should stop them. You know, we should try to tell them, encourage them, you know, come on, don't do that. You know, why are you messing your life for? Why are you wasting your life for in drugs, in alcohol, in zina? We should try to stop them, because if we stop them, then we'll be saved. But if we don't stop them and they are involved in that particular sin, now remember, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's azab comes, we'll also be included in the azab as well. We'll also get involved in the azab. And that's why it's mentioned that the Banu Israel, when they were told by Allah not to fish on Yawm as-Sabt, on the Saturday, so there were two people from that particular group. There were some who were fishing, even though Allah told not to fish on Saturday, whereas the others who basically didn't fish, but they didn't stop them from fishing. So it's mentioned in the books of tafsir that when Allah's azab came, and the azab which came to them was that they were turned into monkeys and swines, those who didn't stop them from fishing on the Saturday, they were also turned into monkeys and swines as well. So remember, when Allah's azab comes, if we don't stop people, we get involved as well. So it's our duty that obviously brothers and sisters outside who may not be that practicing, we should also help them out, encourage them, tell them to come to the masjid, tell them to come to the, bayans and ta'aleem and these kind of things, so that they are also saved from sins as well. And remember, when we give them da'wah, don't think that we're doing it for themselves. We're actually doing it for ourselves as well. Because if Allah's azab was to come, we are not going to get let off as well. So think of it, it's actually our duty, it's for our betterment, it's for our survival that we help the brothers and sisters outside. May Allah give us the tawfiq to act once we said,